Okay, please stand for the reading of the gospel. Today's reading is from Luke chapter 17, verses 5 to 10. The apostles said to the Lord, "Increase our faith." The Lord replied, "If you had faith the size of a mustard seed, you could say to this mulberry tree, 'Be uprooted and planted in the sea,' and it would obey you. Who among you would say to your slave who has just come in from plowing or tending sheep in the field, 'Come here at once and take your place at the table'? Would you not rather say to him, 'Prepare supper for me, put on your apron, and serve me while I eat and drink. Later you may eat and drink'? Do you thank the slave for doing what was commanded? So you also, when you have done all that you were ordered to do, say, 'We are worthless slaves. We have done only what we ought to have done.'" This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
You may be seated. So for the next 4 weeks in our lectionary readings, we'll have a reading from Timothy, 2 Timothy, which is one that Evelyn read. And I'm going to talk about that instead of the gospel reading. When I get lost in the details of something, in order to refocus, I ask myself, what is really important here? Religion is not a scientific experiment. I don't understand why people want to have explanations for every little thing. Like, how does the Trinity work? Was the New Testament originally written in Greek or Hebrew? Which words can be traced back to the historical Jesus? Was the Exodus in 1260 BC or 1446 BC? These things are not important. Even the greatest minds today cannot explain the how and why of the universe, and Christians who worship the greatest mystery of all want it spelled out in black and white. These things are not important. What is important is faith. So if you ask anyone who has a religious experience, it's not something that can be explained. That's what makes it so powerful. As you start explaining things, they lose their power. And so faith is what's important. You need faith to get you through the tough times. I know that sounds trite, like a stock answer, but our faith is not in fanciful fables or make-believe stories. Myths won't get you through the tough times of life, no matter how compelling the narrative. We know that our faith is not made up. Sometimes we doubt, but something inside of you knows that God is real, and he's not some old man on a throne in heaven, but a powerful mystical something, not like a man at all, even though we call him Father. For compelling testimony on the power of faith, I invite you to read any Holocaust survivor's testimony. I especially think Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning is a worthy read. As a psychologist, he was able to analyze the suffering of his fellow prisoners and come to the conclusion that those who were able to persevere had hope for the future and had faith that their life held meaning. Even in those terrible conditions, people were able to survive relying on their faith. We can relate even though our circumstances aren't quite that severe. There have been times in your life and mine where our faith has sustained us. Or how about John Newton, the author of Amazing Grace, who was a slave trader before he became an Anglican priest? You may be surprised to learn at how imperfect he really was. At the age of 11, he joined his father on a ship as an apprentice. His career was marked by excessive disobedience. His disobedience led him being pressed into the Royal Navy, where he routinely overstayed his leave, eventually deserting the Navy to visit his lady friend. After enduring humiliation for deserting, he was traded to a slave ship. On the slave ship, he openly mocked the captain by writing obscene poems about him that the crew would then sing. His disagreements with other sailors led him to being starved and imprisoned like the slaves that they carried, and eventually forced to work on a plantation in Sierra Leone. His father, as a man of influence, secured him a position on another ship, the Greyhound, where the captain made note that Newton was one of the most profane men he had ever met, not only using the worst words, but creating new ones to exceed the limits of debauchery. While aboard this ship, he had a conversion experience. In the North Atlantic, a violent storm came up and swept overboard a crew member that had been standing in the place Newton himself had been standing moments before. Now, Newton, after bailing water and expecting to be capsized, exclaimed, "If this will not do, then the Lord have mercy on us." As he pondered this statement, he wondered if he was worthy of God's love and mercy. He came to believe that God had sent him a profound message and had begun to work through him. And it would seem he was right, because later he settled down, married his lady friend, became an Anglican priest, penned one of the greatest hymns ever written, and helped to bring about the end of slavery in England. And so faith can turn your life around, making even the worst offenders into the best defenders. Anything is possible with faith. The power of God revealed through the resurrection of Jesus Christ has transformed countless lives through the ages, starting with the disciples, going through Paul and Timothy, Christian martyrs, and for our reformers, all the way down to history, to the present age, with you and me, and it shows no sign of stopping. Maybe you are here today because your parents brought you to church as a child, and their parents brought them to church. We can thank our ancestors for our faith that laid such a foundation for our lives. I have heard many of you say that you can't imagine journeying through life without faith. How would you make sense of it all? How would you bear the suffering? We see in this letter that Paul is giving thanks for Timothy's mother and grandmother, who were early believers of the gospel. He reminds Timothy to rekindle his faith because the church is facing a difficult time, and Timothy might be afraid for the future of the church. Our church today is facing a difficult time, and many are afraid of the future. I myself was in despair that this United Methodist Church, which seemed such a citadel of faith, a model church, would dissolve away right before my eyes, until I realized that God is bigger than the church. The United Methodist Church may cease to exist. This church building will inevitably fall into ruin and be demolished, and everyone here today will eventually meet their earthly demise, but God will still be God. He will still be King of the universe as he has been since the beginning of time, until time comes to an end. And so my faith is secure in the majesty of God, because this trifling controversy today, the declining church attendance and the apathy of the average citizen, cannot diminish his power or extinguish his love for humanity. This is the rekindling of faith that Paul is telling Timothy about. Light the fire. Remember back to the time when your faith was strong and recall those invincible feelings. For God has not given us a spirit of fear or cowardice, but a heaping measure of power and love and all the self-discipline needed to complete our mission. God will not cease calling to humankind, and this group who call themselves Christians, which started over 2,000 years ago in obscurity and through the ages grew to be the largest religion in the world, will not perish because a few of its members cannot agree at this time and place. Jesus, through his life, death, and resurrection, is the demonstration of God's love and power. Much has been made about God's love. In this age, we love to talk about God's love, and that's important. We need to know that God loves us, but we also need to know that God is worthy of worship. God is more than your Father in heaven, who knows you inside and out and yet still loves you more than anyone here on earth ever could. God is also our creator, and as such fashioned this miraculous world in which we live. I love to think of God as the creator because it is the closest I can get to imagining his power. The power of the rushing wind, the energy of the crashing wave, the mighty tumult of an earthquake, and the intensity of a raging storm, all of these things are tangible and grant me a glimpse into how powerful he actually is. The other side of creation is the nature of this universe. The scope and complexity are mind-boggling. I can understand creating something as complex as a computer or a space telescope or a Swiss watch, But these machines pale in comparison to just one of our kidneys, which are absolutely amazing. Each kidney contains about 1 million units called nephrons, which filter 150 quarts of blood per day, removing toxins, medications, and waste products. But the kidneys do more than just filter blood. They maintain homeostasis in the body by regulating the acid-base balance and several key electrolytes, along with managing extracellular fluid volume. They produce and release hormones which regulate blood pressure and the production of red blood cells and vitamin D. The dialysis machine, which was created to support kidney function, really only performs one of these functions, which is filtering the blood, and even then it's only 10 to 15% as effective as a healthy kidney. No, this is not an anatomy lecture, but a peek inside our incredible body which God made. And so if you're looking for an expression of the creative power of God, you need look no further than your own body, for what I have described is but one of the many parts of this marvelous mechanism. Indeed, if you can get into the habit of seeing God in the creation around you, even in your own body, letting yourself experience the awe which you cannot even put into words, you can begin to see that he is powerful as well as loving. He is greater than we can ever imagine, and if we fear for the future, it is because our faith is not strong enough. As we seek to respond to God's call, we need not fear. We don't need to worry whether he knows what he's doing, whether he really wants us to do that, or whether we will be able. It's only important to have faith in the God who called you. We may not see the results in our lifetime. We may not know that we made a difference, but like so many others, we need to have faith and go boldly into the unknown, knowing that God is in control. As I stood in the gallery at the Art Institute of Chicago and gazed at Van Gogh's self-portrait, I marveled at the attention it was receiving, and I wondered how Vincent might feel if he could see all of these people admiring his art. I'm a big fan of Van Gogh, and I happen to know that he suffered self-doubt and depression his whole life, and he died in obscurity. He thought very little of himself, and he wondered if his life was worth living. Indeed, he took his own life at the age of 37, a beautiful life cut short by self-doubt. If only he could have seen those people staring at his art, his faith in life would be renewed. But the thing is, we can't see the future. We cannot know how God will use us to influence society. But we can have faith that our lives are meaningful and take comfort that knowing the people we touch every day feel the difference that our friendship has made in their lives. Standing on the shoulder of giants with millennia of Jewish and Christian tradition behind us, we need not to be afraid to join our voices to those who have gone before, adding to the never-ending stream of testimony of God's greatness. He's shown a light in our darkness, and we are called to continue to shine the light of truth, which is the gospel of Jesus Christ, into the darkness of the world. Our faith calls us to be the herald of good news. We have no need to fear. Our God is the almighty creator who loves all people without measure. This is the good news, and it is faith in this gospel that keeps our hearts alight through the darkness of the world. Powerful and loving God, we sometimes shrink in fear, afraid of what might happen in the future, afraid of what people might think about us. Grant us your eternal perspective of the wonder of creation and the transforming power of love, which we have as gifts from you. Help us to share your life-changing gifts with the people you bring into our lives and to live according to your will. Amen. Now we will sing, I Know Whom